You're tuning in live to the United Public Radio Network, airing on 105.3 and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. We are streaming on all the popular platforms every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join me for a candid and thought-provoking conversation celebrating your unique journey because you are worth it. Hello, everyone. We are already on a Monday. Can you believe that? I'm so excited to have Erica here today. I'll give a little bio, but for those just tuning in for the first time, welcome to Breaking Norms, Building Dreams. I'm your host, Brittany Ashley, and we are broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. Get ready to escape with us for the next hour as we break norms and build dreams with Erica. I'm so excited to have you today, Erica.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with you.
So speakers, listeners, all the people listening to us today, if you don't know who Erica is a CEO and founder of Momwell, is a registered psychotherapist specialized in maternal mental health. As a mother of 3 boys, she has personally navigated the challenges of motherhood, including postpartum depression. She is a founder of Momwell to provide specialized mom-centered mental health support. An award-winning publicist, author, Erica has been featured in Times Magazine, US Today, and so much more. She's an advocate for inclusive, accessible maternal health and redefines motherhood expectations. I'm just so excited to have you here because one of the reasons why I started my business was to help moms work from home. So when I came across your platform, I feel like a big brother, like just watching you. I'm just so excited.
Yeah, it's evolved a lot over the years. I always kind of joke that I did not go to school to become a therapist, to found a company and have a creative platform. And sometimes it's so strange how we find ourselves in these places. But yeah, we're doing some exciting things.
You are doing so many exciting things. Maybe you can just share a little bit about your journey. And I know I did a quick bio on you, but I love to hear more from you than the bio.
Yeah. Well, I started as a therapist. I was working in children and family practice, kind of just navigating my way after graduating, trying to figure out, is this what life is now that school is done? And do I continue school? And I feel like, especially as millennial women, we've been told, go for your dreams and shatter all these glass ceilings and, trying to process that. And then I became pregnant with my first son, and I had 3 boys in the span of 3.5 years. And I was just thrown into the deep end, I feel like.
Yeah.
And I went through my own postpartum depression and anxiety throughout that time that really kind of came to a head after my third was born and my third postpartum, 8 to 12 weeks postpartum. And I talk about my story really candidly about how I got to this place where I just realized that I was not okay. I was not myself. I was ragey. I was irritable. I was anxious. From the time I opened my eyes in the morning, I was already at capacity. And any little thing that happened was such a disruption for me. I had such a hard time coping with it. And then I got some help, got some treatment, went on medication, tried to process all that was happening. And ultimately that led me to niching down in maternal mental health and specializing in this field. I didn't even know that maternal mental health was a thing. I was a therapist. I didn't know that this was something like a high risk time for women and families. I didn't know how symptoms show up and what this really looks like sort of tangibly and practically for people. And as I was unpacking that, my own journey for myself and learning and specializing, I started an Instagram page just to help others, educate them and support them in their adjustment. And that really just kind of organically grew and took off and has developed into a maternal mental health platform now at this point where we offer services across most of the US and Canada.
I love that so much. I find I'm just putting your website there for anyone viewing. For the listeners, I'll put it within the comments on where to find Erica as well here. But Thank you for sharing your journey with us and just being so authentic. I suffered also from postpartum with my first, and like I was scared to leave the house. I was like, I won't leave. I'm fine. And everyone's like, well, why don't you want to leave the house? I'm like, well, first off, giving me a kid for my first time ever, and you're expecting me to go do all these things. I'm just like horrified. So I didn't actually really understand or realize that I was suffering from postpartum until I started talking to the mental health nurses at the society here in Victoria. And they're like, oh, you're showing signs of postpartum. And maybe we can dig into that a little bit
Yeah.
of the moms or even partners listening, because it's important, I think, too, not just as a mom, but a partner to understand and see those signs too.
Yeah. So we've got postpartum depression, which I think is more commonly talked about, but still often confused with like baby blues. And when does it become depression? When is it just, hormone fluctuations? And there's a lot of parsing apart there. And then there's also postpartum anxiety and, maybe birth trauma if we've had a really traumatic experience.
Mhm.
So when you're talking about feeling like you don't want to leave the house, well, from
Mm.
a depression standpoint, this could be like if we feel low mood, we feel like a lethargy, like so lethargic and exhausted that
Yeah.
even like brushing our hair could feel like it's a lot of work. Taking a shower. I mean, early postpartum taking a shower is a lot of work, regardless of whether you're struggling or not. But like little daily tasks start to become so challenging.
Mm.
Getting motivation to engage in things that you're usually interested in can be really hard. But then on the flip side of that, there's also postpartum anxiety, where I worked with a lot of moms who are fearful to leave the house because, it was COVID and there's germs and there's like even daily things that are normal that we navigate every day as, individuals feel like threats now that we have a child that we are caring for. Like a stroller walk on a busy street can feel like a threat if we're really struggling with intrusive thoughts or anxiety. So helping people to understand what is new mom worry that is sort of average and expected versus what is postpartum anxiety that is now sort of tormenting you and really impacting your experience and your adjustment into your new role. And the same with baby blues versus postpartum depression. And when do we seek help, or how do we navigate these feelings? And it's often so muddled up. I was in it as a clinician and couldn't even see it for myself.
Yeah. Do you maybe want to define a little bit more there for everyone listening of the blues part? Because I've heard of that too. So
Mhm.
I was just kind of told like this is what you have, and I didn't even think about looking more into it. I was just like, sure, okay, I'll come to like our, I don't know what they call it, like the circle for moms. Um, this is right before COVID, and then
Mm.
into COVID.
Yeah. So I watch like a lot of reality TV, and I was just recently watching, is it The Valley, the spinoff of Vanderpump Rules? And they were talking really openly about baby blues and postpartum depression in this series. And baby blues often gets used to sort of maybe minimize or define or dismiss really kind of roller coaster emotions postpartum. But what I will say about baby blues is they are tethered to your hormone fluctuations, particularly after birth when our body's kind of recalibrating. And they last at most 2 to 3 weeks postpartum.
Mm.
So if you are like weepy, you can have like, crying spells and things like that, but you also have a baseline of sort of like normalcy, or like to you what feels normal to you. Like you have moments of joy, you feel like your mood is relatively consistent, but you might have moments of sadness and weepiness. Whereas with postpartum depression, it is more of an undercurrent that still will come out maybe in weepiness or in irritability or postpartum rage and anger. It can have a lot of expressions, but it's not situational and isolated. It kind of just is this undercurrent in the background that impacts how we are feeling day to day.
Mm.
And a lot of us want to white knuckle it or try and sleep and try to do some things to see if it helps it to get better.
Mhm.
But with a true postpartum depression, we'll usually see that it's kind of persistent beyond a good night's sleep.
Mm.
And it's usually when kids start to sleep, babies start to sleep through the night, that parents will start to realize, like whether it's partner or mom, oh wait, maybe there is something more going on here, because I'm sleeping. Some of my needs are starting to be met now, and I still can't pull myself out of this funk that I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Feels like a whirlwind after they're like past the baby stage.
Mhm.
You had three like right after each other, and like two, like we waited a little bit. Um, I think also too, like I wanted to wait a bit for my mental health because I just felt like I was feeling a bit disconnected. I didn't understand what was going on. And also too, like first time having like I was the kind of kid that would babysit dogs.
Mhm.
Like, I found the loophole. I'm gonna babysit dogs and kids because pet owners seem to pay a little bit more for, the dogs, and so I end up like, I started on that journey of, like, babysitting, but I just was like, "You know what? I feel more comfortable with dogs," and so I end up going that way. So me seeing myself as a mom, like, I never really thought about it until it happened, I guess, and it's like, "Oh, it's happening.
Mhm.
Let's do this thing." And then it's, like, the pressures too, not just postpartum, but just, like, society as, like, what does the perfect mom look like? Um, Maybe you have some insight on that because I was actually just reading a bit of your guys's report that you did not too long ago, I believe, about the digital space and how it
Mm.
affects moms. I started reading into it like later, like yesterday, and I was like, oh, I need to like go do work. But I felt like some of it was so interesting because I really think we get told a lot in the online space sometimes that we don't know the true things of how to feel sometimes.
Mhm. Yeah, it is really challenging, I think, to enter into motherhood in this era where we are exposed to so many sort of ways or approaches of other people. Like if you think about my mom who didn't have social media, she would go to a play group or a mom group and be exposed to maybe the 8 or 10 people and how they parented in that group,
Mhm.
versus we get to see everything. Like, I mean, the highlight reel, we don't get to see everything, but we get to see a very curated version of many different approaches to parenting.
Mm.
And a lot of this societal messaging comes with a lot of pressure and expectations. And we have this often like romanticized ideal when we step into motherhood for the first time, that, oh, I'm going to be this way and it's going to be like this. And I'm going to approach, my child like that. And we set all these expectations for ourselves or have internalized them from society's
Mhm.
expectations. And then we step into the role and it is nothing like what we expected it to be.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, the further the gap between what we expect and
Mhm.
the reality of the role often predicts the level of distress and dissatisfaction we can feel.
Yes.
So if we don't understand or know or have been around a lot of kids, like I had not been around babies and didn't really have a realistic sense of the sleep deprivation or how to prepare and have a postpartum plan or any of those things.
Mm.
And so as we have this gap in reality and expectations, then there's a lot of distress and pain and confused emotions that come with that. But one of the things that I've seen that happens that's maybe the most detrimental of it all is that we often look around as mothers and see that everybody else appears to have this under control. They
Yeah.
seem to be doing it and they seem to be doing it well. So the fact that I am struggling right now in this moment means that I wasn't cut out for this role,
Mhm.
means that I am failing in some way or I'm not good enough. And rather than sort of fact checking the expectations and like the absolute unrealistic, weight and responsibility we put on mothers and women, we blame ourselves and feel like if we just recommit to doing more tomorrow, better tomorrow, that we'll be able to sort of emulate this perfect mother myth that is out there.
Mhm. Yeah. I find like this year, if anything, I've been like repeating to myself is give yourself grace. like building a business, raising two small kids, it doesn't happen overnight. Rome wasn't built overnight. So why are you putting so much extra pressure on yourself to have these targets over here, making the perfect lunch, whatever that is, and just like putting so much more on you than you really need? And I feel like with social media too, like, yes, you're seeing all the pretty stuff on the forefront, but you never know what's really happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, and that's why I think that it's so important that, as Momwell and formerly Happy as a Mother, the community, that we show up in this space in this way, because we know that there are studies out there that social media can be detrimental to our mental health, right? But I'm also like, if I'm trying to spread an awareness about the myths or the unrealistic expectations or even the red flags for postpartum depression or anxiety, I
Mhm.
want to be doing that where the moms are and where they're hanging out and how they're taking in their content, when they're scrolling and whatever. And so, UConn and UFT, University of Toronto, had done a study on Momwell, the one that you were referring to see the impact that engaging with our online community can have on maternal mental health.
Mhm.
And we can see that actually social media can really be used for good to disarm some of these pressures as well,
Mhm.
to really educate moms on what some of the warning signs are to make sure you do seek out care. So there
Mhm.
was a lot of really like reaffirming findings that came out of that study. And I
Amazing.
think that it's important that there are voices counteracting these really intense
Mhm.
pressures and narratives.
Yeah. I know when I first had my daughter, I was like, I'm going to join a mom group. And when I was in it's like a Facebook group, I can't, they, depending on what year your kiddo's in, they make all
Right.
grades. And so I was like super pumped. I had like a mom group. And then I just felt like no matter what you shared in that group and specifically, like you'd get attacked. And I was
Mhm.
I don't feel like this is a safe place because I'm always feeling judged. And motherhood's hard. So
Mhm.
I end up like removing myself completely. And now with my son, like I didn't even bother joining any of those kind of groups, but I feel, I guess, a bit guilty because I'm like, I feel like I need to make more mom friends.
It's really tricky because we're so isolated as a parenting generation. We don't really have a lot of other generations sort of around and helping us parent. So the support systems feel like they're really lacking in that way, especially for our generation. And
Mhm.
then especially I find with first-time moms and new moms, but it happens even beyond that, when we enter into groups and we are still free falling in our motherhood experience and we are still trying to carve out our own identity and confidence in our role, the
Mhm.
way that we look to reaffirm ourselves often is trying to prove our rightness,
Yeah.
maybe blaming or criticizing others or sort of challenging their parenting approach versus ours, because
Mhm.
often we don't even feel confident or sturdy in our own choices during that time. And it can become really tricky when we don't feel like we are anchored or grounded in something that feels solid and secure for us. And I talk a lot in my book about values led mothering and like finding your own motherhood identity so that you feel like you have a criteria, something really rooted in meaningful things for you to make your decisions off of, so that even if somebody does disagree with you, you know that that's coming from their own, values and priorities and what's important to them versus you having to adopt it as your own.
Yeah, I love that. And your book, so anyone listening, is called Releasing the Mother Load. Did I say
Mhm.
that right? Yeah. Tell us more about your book. I'm so excited to read it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all about the invisible load and the mental load, and it's one of the things that maybe most surprised me or that comes up the most sort of behind closed doors as I'm working with moms and maternal mental health, is the unbearable weight that we carry that we cannot turn off, and it's invisible and our partners don't understand it and nobody thanks us for it, but it has to be done or a household wouldn't run. And really looking at what that load is. Why does it feel so much heavier than previous generations? Why are we defaulted into carrying it? And how can we reevaluate that load and let go of what is not essential? And
Mhm.
also, like, decouple it from our identities so that when we do like share ownership with a partner, it doesn't feel like we are letting it go because we're failing, but we are feeling like empowered in redistributing. I,
Mm,
I feel like our identity is often woven in being a good mom equals the care tasks that we do, or equals having a clean house and the chores and the things that we do. And if we are measuring our performance and our role based on those things, it will be very difficult to share ownership over them or to let them go because we think we should be doing them and doing them well.
yeah. And I'm excited to dig more into your book. I really am. I feel that there's a lot that you put in there that I can't wait to dig in more deeper and just to like self-reflect too. But you're talking about your values as motherhood as a mom, I bet, and finding your inner values. And I feel like when we're kind of thrown into it, if it's your first kid, you kind of forget a bit about your values because you're just in survival mode. It's like, I got this, or like breastfeeding. I was like, I will not breastfeed, and then I was like, I'll try. And then with my daughter, it was difficult. And then with my son, it was even more difficult. We think that maybe he had latch issues, where he was a true COVID baby during COVID, and so that meant that extra support there with the wives that we were working with, the motherhood wives. They just kind of was like, here's your kiddo, all is good, goodbye. And then I would
Mm,
call them. So I didn't have a doctor. And I would call them like, okay, yeah, we were good for the first few weeks. He was eating, but all of a sudden he's like not eating. And so I was just kind of in that spiral again. And I think I wasn't even fully like let go of like the depression before. So it's just kind of like on top of everything else. So yeah, I'm excited to kind of read more of the book and understanding too, like what you're saying there is finding values that are aligned with you, because you kind of get kind of noise. There's so much noise in the world today. And so sometimes we forget what our true values are. And I work with this on just clients on building a business. Like, what's your brand? What's your values? But I love that you take this intake for motherhoods because I never even thought of that.
well, yeah, and I think that we can really attach ourselves to different types of mothering and different labels and groups, like you said,
Mhm.
like the breast is best versus combo feeding versus formula feeding. And if we're carrying any kind of perfectionism into motherhood around something like feeding, the breast is best messaging has gone really far. And I just actually did an interview and an episode on my podcast where the rates of underfeeding and dehydration in infants has increased significantly since the breast is best campaign has really taken hold. And it's actually incredibly dangerous to have an underfed newborn baby. So there are all of these things that get taken to extremes.
Mhm.
And it's really hard as a first time parent to find any kind of sturdy ground to stand on, right? For sure, when we are sleep deprived, early postpartum, we're not thinking about our values being our criteria by which we make decisions. But I think that now, like looking back, for example, I really held on to perfectionism and wanting to do everything right. And now, as a value, I actually really value flexibility, especially as new data presents itself or new information presents itself or the situation changes. Reevaluating and being flexible is actually something that is very meaningful and important to me. So if
Mhm.
I was feeding and it was going well, then that's great. But then if it took a turn and the latch wasn't happening very well, like you said, then I'm going to reevaluate now what is best in that situation. But when we're really steadfast holding on to a particular label or approach, we
Mhm.
don't have the flexibility to reevaluate because we're very focused on trying to do it right, quote unquote.
Mhm.
And that is a very reoccurrent theme that I see in the moms and parents that I work with.
Yeah. And it's so true because like when I first had my daughter, I was like, well, this is the right way because
Mhm.
everybody only ever talked about it that way. And I pushed myself. And I just remember being like so uncomfortable. I hated every moment of it. And they're like, oh, this is a way for you to like build that connection. I was like, I hate every minute of this. Like this is not great. And so with my son, I was like, okay, I'll try it so I can say that I tried, but I just knew, like, I was saying to my husband, I was like, "I need your help at night. I
Mhm.
can't do it anymore. Like, I can't be waking up." Like, my son was always waking up, like, every half an hour because he wasn't eating enough, and so I was like, "I'm, like, ready to, like, nope." So I was like, "Let's try the bottle. Let's try to get him to do both." And so then naturally he preferred the bottle, and I was like, "Well, he he spoke." He showed
Mhm.
I'm good at walking away from not breastfeeding, but I think a part of me too was feeling so guilty that I didn't, like, maybe last as longer than I should have with my daughter, like, that mom guilt really starts to set in.
And there's a lot of grief.
Yeah.
Like, you wouldn't believe the amount of people that I've spoken to where their children are, like, school age and they're, like, well beyond postpartum, and they still break down in absolute grief and guilt that they didn't get the breastfeeding journey that they wanted.
Mhm.
And that speaks to a couple of things for me. One, the enormous pressure that the one singular approach sort of messaging that we've got puts on women and mothers. And there's a lot of misinformation here about that every woman can produce breast milk when actually the rates are like 1 in 5 to 1 in 7 women don't produce enough milk to actually feed and sustain their baby. Like there's a lot here, just even based on like the data.
Yeah.
And then also feeding represents a few other things to us. It's like measuring our worth and our performance in our role, how good of a job we're doing. It's often presented to us as the way to form a secure bond with our child, which is just fundamentally not based on any kind of science or research.
Mhm.
So feeding becomes a very emotionally charged and loaded conversation because it represents so many different things, especially as we're trying to establish ourselves in our new role.
100%. I feel too like it really, like, I think hit me harder when I was at the hospital because
Mm.
a nurse would not let you go unless you showed that you can latch, or like it was just like I remember she was not the nicest. Like I was like,
Yeah, and well, and a lot of hospitals have, like, breast is best sort of, like, mandates and things. There's a really great foundation called Fed is Best,
yeah.
led by a physician, an emergency doctor, that is doing incredible work that has a lot of fact checking and myth busting information in this category because um, I felt that too, and I actually have clients who come to me who have, like, had double mastectomies because 'cause they've had breast cancer and still feel like they should be breastfeeding their child. Like, it just goes so deep, the pressure that women feel,
Mhm.
and it's to feed your baby and to make sure that they are not underfed and that they are getting the nutrients they need is the goal. Like, that is the primary goal. How that happens, as long as it is safe and, we're not, like, supplementing things that are not formula and are not, like, safe. As long as we're doing that in a safe way, like, that's all that matters for our babies.
100%. And I feel like it's taken me some time to kind of, I guess, I don't want to say accept the concept, but more or less like give myself like that, like it's okay, like it's time to move on. You've done what you could do. They're healthy, and let's go to the next stages in life because now we're on the school stages.
Yeah, I think acceptance is a good word for it, to not sort of beat ourselves up over or, be self-critical or shame ourselves. Why couldn't you just, or if you had just done this, like
Mm,
finding some acceptance to say, like, listen, either he wasn't latching or I was underproducing or like whatever that is, and like giving ourselves some grace or speaking to ourselves the way we would speak to a friend of ours who was struggling um, is exactly it, and getting to that place. And sometimes it takes some processing, and it's harder for some more than others. And but hopefully, we can get to that place where we can find some peace with how our feeding journey went.
yes, 100%. We're already midway. Can you believe
Oh
it?
my goodness.
Welcome to Breaking Norms, Building Dreams, and we're live on the United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network 105.3 and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. I know we have some listeners, so if anyone wants to pop in some questions, you're welcome to, because I can see you. But yeah, like it just opens up, like the more, like we're done after 2. I don't know if I could do 3. We have neighbors across the street and they have 3. And I'm just like, I don't know. Like, I feel like I'd be one outnumbered.
It was a big shift for me and us personally. Like I felt like it was exponentially more children than 2, but not everybody reports that feeling. I think it's just that we were already kind of feeling at capacity. So it kind of threw us off kilter a bit. But yeah, it's a lot of kids, it feels like.
But the one thing that I love, because I was an only child, so I actually always thought if I ever had kids down the road after meeting my husband, I was like, oh, I would want three boys. And when I had my daughter, I was like, well, maybe we'll nix the third. I'll try for 2.
Yeah.
Sibling love. I just love it so much. Them growing up together means the world.
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing that I think a lot of us carry into parenthood is sort of an idealized family. So we like have an idealized version of ourselves in our role, like what a good mom is, quote unquote. But then we also have these expectations of how many children we might have, what genders they might be. And I work with a lot of clients on grief around whether they can have another child or not, or their partner has changed their mind, or in a traumatic birth, they lost the ability to grow their family, or all kinds of situations that play out that change or alter what that idealized version of our family might look like. Or like you said, you got two kids deep and we're like, I think that this is it for us, right? And being able to process that and come to terms with that. The decision about whether to add a baby to the family or not, I know that sometimes that is not always a choice that we still have. And that's, I just want to acknowledge that. But deciding whether or not to expand your family is probably one of the most common conversations that comes up on my platform, which is shocking because we think we know, and then things change and life changes. Our capacity is not what we thought it might be. There's just a lot to factor in there.
Yeah, and I still think we're still in that society too of, oh, are you guys been together for how long now? Are you going to get engaged? Or when are you getting married? Oh, you're married now. When's the kids coming? Oh, you have one kid. What about the other? It's like never stop.
Yeah. And all of this line of questioning for mothers and women in particular is all anchored in children and family, right? Like it's all like, oh, your kids are getting older. With me, I always get asked, oh, are you going to try for a fourth? Are you going to have the girl? Or if you start to get some capacity and the kids are all in school, it's almost like, I don't know, we fill that space with more child-related activities or expanding our family, and I'm like, we are allowed to exist and want things for ourselves and to desire things for ourselves outside of our role as well, and that is okay.
Yeah. This is Terry's comment, the natural order of life in the family, children. Maybe you can expand more on that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Comments there, Terry. Maybe you can expand a little bit more what you're saying there. But yeah, I just feel that there's, in society as a whole, it just always, there's just so much pressure coming in different areas. And then it could also come from upbringing or so forth. So just so many different angles around it. So I just want to go back to your the value piece, because I think that's so important. Do you have any tips for moms, parents that are listening that are struggling to find their inner values?
I actually have a free exercise or resource called a values sort. So momwell.com/values sort. It's a free download. And it's an exercise with lots of different values words, because often we don't even know sort of what words to start with little descriptors. And like little kind of like definitions of what that value means. And you cut the cards up, you lay them out on the table. You can sit with your partner or do it by yourself and just read them out loud and what resonates and what doesn't. And first we get rid of all the things that don't resonate.
Mm.
And then we start to dwindle it down and get our 5 to 10 top priority values. And
Mhm.
I see values as having like a few different spheres. So like I have individual values, me, Erica, the person outside of my role, right? And those are things like constant development and mastery of things. And that is constant learning and improvement like of myself and in the things around me. And then I have values within my role as a mother and as a family, we have values. So being able to go through and say, okay, I really value, for example, slowness. I really value slowness in our family life because my business and professional life is so freaking chaotic
Mm.
that I really like to try and keep a minimal, slow schedule with our family and the kids so that we are not running out the door 5 times a day on the weekends. So it really helps us to anchor ourselves in a criteria so that when we're rolling around to back to school time in the fall, we're seeing all the cute fall photos and all the perfectly curated lunches and all the activities that everybody's being signed up to. And we're getting this like panging, guilty, aching feeling that like, oh, my kids should be in more activities or, oh, we haven't like the lunch that I sent them with was basically just fishies and like random packaged foods. And we start to get that like nagging feeling. We
Mhm.
can say, well, actually, we really value slowness. And that's why we didn't sign them up for every single activity this fall that we could have because we want to have some family time. Or it's okay to value convenience
Yeah.
sometimes and choose the path of ease when it comes to school lunch that I know a lot of folks in the US have or various approaches because we don't have to always do the most labor intensive, time intensive, cost intensive option.
Mm.
And I think that we miss sort of like we confuse that
Yeah.
with equaling being good for us and our children. Like the more time and energy and money it takes, the better it is for our family. And that's just not true. And so our values help to give us a criteria to make those decisions.
I love that. I find, well, like you were just talking about the activities things. And so my daughter was in Taekwondo. She told us that she was bored. And so I was like, okay, what else? So I put her in gymnastics and we finally got her in swimming again. It's been like chaos to get into swimming over here. I don't know
Why
what
do we have to set an alarm and be at our computer at like 7 in the morning to get swimming
right.
lessons? I will never understand. I don't know.
Ridiculous. I'm like, I just think that they need swimming lessons. We live on the island.
Yeah.
But it's taken us months to get back into swimming lessons. Since the last time we were in swimming lessons was when she was 8 months old. So we were sitting at like the computer. But going back to like feeling a bit guilty on not getting them in enough activities definitely showed up for me last week because I was like, okay, we got them in gymnastics, both kids actually randomly at the same time, which is perfect. They both flow.
Amazing. Yeah.
I was like, this never happens. So we're going to do it. They're both in gymnastics and then both in swimming staggered times, but it works out like half an hour difference. But I was like, okay, but I feel like we need to do one more thing. But I was like, why do we need to do one more thing? I'm like, is that just me with I'm like self-diagnosed with ADHD, always constantly needing to do something. And I was like, is that me? Or is it just like the inner guilt feeling like, oh, they should do more because everybody else seems to be doing like at least 5 other activities versus us?
Mhm.
What is it?
And it's important for us to kind of like fact check or at least pause and become curious about why
Mm.
we are making these decisions. Are we making them out of guilt? I think that a guilt driven decision is a reason to pause. Like there's a red flag there. If we are making a decision out of guilt, out of shame, out of our own trauma and upbringing,
Mhm.
the decision might still be right, but I think it deserves a curious look into why that's our knee jerk reaction first, and
Yeah.
then making a conscious decision from there on. And a lot of times, especially in my early motherhood, I was, I feel like like accepting these external pressures and trying to prove or show that I was good in this role, or that I could do this, or that I was right. And I'm like, to who and why? And I'm the one here suffering so significantly,
Mhm.
especially my mental health, just eroding, trying to prove this, right? So it really does wear us down and have a lasting impact when we try to rise to every occasion, even if they are not sort of most helpful or best
Mhm.
for us and our family.
Yeah. And thinking more about what I was just saying, like, I think part of me is just, I think because I was the only child, I was like in every different activity there was. Like I was in piano, I was in soccer, I was like anything and everything I was in. And so, like, is it just because I'm thinking of all the different activities that I have done throughout my past life that they also need to do all those too?
Yeah. Well, it's actually really interesting. So, we're living and mothering in the era of what's called intensive mothering. The norms of this intensive mothering and the beliefs and myths of it tell us that we are best biologically suited to care for our children, that motherhood should be labor intensive, all consuming, that we should put our children and our family's needs above and beyond our own, and that we should be satisfied in our role and not really long for anything else outside of that. And
Mhm.
when we have this expectation, what actually research has shown, the more people fall into this like intensive mothering belief category, often the more scheduled they are, because they feel that they have to spend so much time with their children, but it's far too exhausting to spend every second with your children, that
Yeah.
they put them in a lot of organized activities in order to sort of like sidestep the guilt for like feeling the need to be on and focused on them all the time. Does that
Mhm.
make sense what I'm saying? Are you tracking with
Yeah.
me?
Yeah.
And so we feel enormous pressure to be there every waking second of the day, and sometimes curating activities is one way we can get a break from that, because we feel that pressure so significantly.
Yeah.
So intensive mothering and the pressure to be zoomed in on our children and have them be our primary focus 24/7 also really plays a role here.
Mhm. I actually have it, like, I know I told you I had questions written down, but, like, I only have that noted and circled to bring up intensive mothering.
Yeah.
I'm happy you brought that up. No, I do, yeah. It just makes you think so much more. I'm like, "Hmm, well."
Yeah, like what decisions have been my own versus what do I feel like I should do to be a good mom?
Mhm.
And I unpack this in the book a lot. Like we feel that in order to give our children a healthy and, good and secure childhood, that we need to be the Easter bunny and the tooth fairy and all of these things that have been taken to such extremes now,
Yeah.
that we measure our performance by. We think that this is what makes us good, quote unquote, but
Mhm.
it's not based in any kind of research that tells us about what it means to raise thriving, healthy, secure children. Like whether they had a tooth fairy or not is just not making it into the
Yeah.
research in terms of the criteria, right? But this is sort of what is modeled for us, and this is what we perceive as being good in our role.
Yeah. What actually came up for me was thinking about birthdays. And, like, how, like, you look on TikTok and, like, there's all these big fancy birthdays, like, even for, like, the first birthday. Like, I know with my daughter, I think I went like, crazy. I probably went way out. I'm like, "I'm gonna make all these things, do," and then my son's birthday came around, I was like, "No." It's like, not that I love you any less, it's I've put so much pressure on myself thinking that that is considered, like, being, like, the perfect mom and doing, like, all of these, like, I love to do crafts, so I felt like I had to go over the top and
Mhm.
all these things, and then looking back and I'm like, "Why did I do that?" I was, like, exhausted, not enough sleep, but I still pushed myself to do this big birthday thing, and then, I don't know, maybe it was part of, like, social media, maybe affecting me a little bit there, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that it's a bit of a mixture of things, and I will say, like, I am not like, I did not make it out of this pressure. Like, I took this is partially what led to my breakdown turn breakthrough that I talk about so openly was I took on all of these expectations, hook, line, and sinker, you know? So I'm not talking about it from like an outward view in like I lived this and I felt it so strongly as well. And I think that it is when we don't know our own definition for what it means to be a good mom, and we've not really given that thought. And understandably, in the postpartum, it's chaotic, and that's not the first place we go to. But when we don't actually intentionally carve that out, what happens is we try to emulate and step up into every sort of little expectation we think equals good motherhood, and we're going in a million different directions with no real bullseye, with no real plan, with no real goals or measurable outcomes or like any kind of focus, and we can't possibly please everyone and do all the things right. So carving out what it means to be a good mom for us, like for me personally, it is being able to allow my children to have their feelings and validate them and, allow a safe space for them to express them and talk about them and to be there for them consistently as a safe, dependable space.
Mhm.
Attuning to them and noticing if they're not quite okay and if something is wrong and making space to talk about it.
Mhm.
Being a good mom to me also means taking care of myself so that I have the capacity to show up for them. Because before I did that, I was so irritable and cranky and ragey that I wasn't showing up for me or for them. Like it wasn't healthy for anybody. And so getting some roots in what that looks like for us allows us to say, "Oh, I see that that is an expectation you're trying to put in this invisible backpack that I'm carrying, and I actually wanna unsubscribe. This is just junk mail that's adding to all the crap that I'm having to sift through, and it's just not for me, thanks. Like, thanks, but no thanks." And it's not because we're not good enough, it's not because we're failing, it's not because we can't do it, but there's something to being able to say, "I could do that, but I'm actually choosing not to." That is really empowering and allows us to show up in our role differently for ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah. I yeah. It's all about, like we were talking about, values and boundaries, and I feel like having that inner reflection too and giving yourself that moment to be like, "You know what? I'm not showing up the way that I want to be showing up, so how can I, fix this? Because I want to be able to be there, I want to be present." Um, I know one of your shows that I was listening to. I can't remember the topic that I was listening to, but you were talking about parenthood and how partners they can show up to and do dishes and or all these other things in between versus just us. Maybe you want to talk a little bit more on that because I do believe like my husband and I we share. He does the cooking. I know, but nowadays it's like, well, you should be doing the cooking. It's like, no, I don't choose to because I prefer to clean. That's my outlet. I find it
Mm.
helps me release the day a little bit. Sometimes I prefer the cleaning because I have my own way of cleaning.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting in doing the research for releasing the mother load. I did not really expect to find gender norms at the root of how things are often divided in the home. But
Mhm,
research has time and time again shown that when there is a husband and a wife in a home parenting situation, that the woman will auto assume slash be auto defaulted into caregiving and domestic roles. Now, there was possibly a time when this worked. Back like in 1950, 25-ish percent of mothers worked outside of the home.
mhm,
And if that is like primary focus, even still, no, because we've got stay-at-home moms and we can unpack all of that. Like it's not, we're equal partners and parents to our children.
mhm,
Now we have 86, 87% of mothers working outside of the home. So what has happened is women and mothers have been expected to branch out of the gender norm and take on expectations of providing for the family, working outside of the home, while the gender assumptions and norms have not shifted in such a degree in the other direction where partners are expected to take on the care work and the domestic labor in
Mhm.
like in a proportionate amount. So we've got women who go to work full time, come home, start the second shift of all the caregiving and all of the housework and all of the labor. And there's a lot of, well, we're doing a lot better than previous generations and partners do more, and they do, but we're not just talking about helping, we're talking about ownership and equal
Mm.
responsibility in the functioning of the household as it pertains to children and domestic tasks. So it's a big can of worms to open, but it is so important. And one of the things that comes up in therapy most often is, how do I help my partner see the invisible load that I'm carrying? How can we redistribute some of this? How can they see it as a priority or something that they should be carrying and taking part in?
Yeah.
And ultimately, there's a reason why 70% of divorces are initiated by women, because if they're doing all of the labor, they don't want to also have to do it for an adult who can at least do it for themselves, but should also be doing it with
Mm.
the family and contributing to the family.
Like, we've definitely come a long way since back in the day, for sure. Like, I do like to see that, like, my husband was able to take off. They don't call it maternity leave. What do they call
Like
it?
a paternity leave, I think. Yeah.
So it's nice to see that slowly changing into the cycle a bit more, but still, there's still that level of that expectation in society for moms to, either stay at home or do it all in a way. So that's why, like, I love what I'm doing right now in my organization, is just that it's a way for moms still to work and be at home and have that flexibility and all the things above. And so I just I love that we brought that up, because I think it's really important for others to kind of think about a bit. I know when I was in, where was I? I'm trying to remember, but they just made a comment being like, "Oh, shouldn't your husband be doing that?" I can't remember what it was. Oh, mowing the lawn.
Hmm.
I went out to mow the yard, and usually, right, like, that could be, like, the male thing to go off and do, but I was like, "No, like, it hasn't been done, so I know he's in there cooking dinner," so I said I would come out here and do that. So it's just kind of, I feel like there's still room to grow here and have more of the open minds.
We often still subconsciously will see tasks as being either female coded or male coded, like mom coded or dad coded as it pertains to the children.
Yeah.
And no task has a gender. There are very few things aside from physically birthing and maybe breastfeeding
Mhm.
that only mom has to do. And even still with breastfeeding, when I was sleep deprived, my husband would get up, he'd have the monitor, he would get up, bring baby to me to nurse so I wasn't too disrupted, would take baby back, burp, change, settle. And so even then was very involved in the feeding process, even though I was the one feeding. So these
Mm.
tasks in the home, whether they are physical or they are the invisible inventory monitoring sort of pieces, are not gendered. And our partners are capable of doing this work because often they exercise these skills in their workplace environments. It's just that they've never been sort of required to sort of see them and monitor them in the way that we are. And this doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't go from 0 to 100, and we don't redistribute, um, you know, on a one-off conversation. My husband and I have been undoing these gender norms and having these conversations for a few years, but now he is probably more the primary default parent in the home than I am, and it's been sort of a complete role reversal, which has
Yeah.
freed me up and given me capacity to build an entire company, right? Like to write a book on this topic. And then without my sort of reclaiming of some of my time and space and his partnership to do that wouldn't have even been a possibility, because my time would have been spoken for in this domestic labor and in
Mhm.
these caregiving tasks. So it's really important to, start to just become curious about what this defaulted labor looks like in your home and what it means, and start to have these conversations.
Absolutely. We're almost at time. What is next for Momwell, or what's your future goals?
Oh gosh. Well, I've got lots of goals in lots of different areas, but for Momwell, the maternal mental health platform, right now we are focused on expanding the states and provinces that we are offering specialized maternal mental health care, psychotherapy in. So we're in 15 states, we are in several provinces, and we are focused on being accessible and lowering barriers. So we're getting in network with insurance companies in the states so that people can easily engage with our services. So that's a big piece of what we're working on right now. Working on another proposal for another book on anger and rage in motherhood.
Nice.
Yeah, lots of big things on the horizon, but ultimately, the mission has always been that people would be well equipped with understanding that this is a high risk time and why and how to make plans and do things to set ourselves up for a as smooth as it could possibly be or healthy transition into parenthood. So we've got lots of different resources and ways to support families in doing that.
Amazing. I'm so excited to see the new book and then finish reading the other book. I'm a slow
Mhm.
reader, but I'll get through it.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, Erica, for coming on today. I absolutely enjoyed having you. For those just listening or just turning off, thank you so much for coming in to Breaking Norms, Building Dreams. Next week, we have a surprise guest. Just want to finalize some things, and I'll announce that sooner than later. But with that, everyone, remember your journey is unique and your worth is unquestionable. Thank you.
Thanks.